So regarding third-party tools in Final Fantasy XIV, down in the bottom right, we've got my story character hanging out. Every other week, I am doing more story-based streams on Final Fantasy and other games, and that character is helping me replay through all the story that I skipped from ARR forward when I was a story skipper until Shadowbringers, and those are being broken down into parts for people that can't see it live and pushed over onto Gaming Lore Kinda. With shoutouts out of the way, we need to talk about the potential and likely bans in the Final Fantasy XIV community. I understand that at least one has already gone out that somebody has kind of posted screenshots of. Third-party tools. This community has grown a lot over the last several years. And as a result, we have people coming in from other games that are used to using add-ons to supplement the tools that the devs put in. That is against the rules with Final Fantasy XIV, with the rare exception of you are allowed to use, I believe, shaders is the only thing that they don't technically say they're going to ban on. They have not always enforced this, so it has been very frustrating because on one hand, people say, well, I don't want them to enforce super strictly. That would be really crappy. On the other hand, it feels really weird when they say don't do this, and then you see people doing it that don't get a ban. And so as those people have continued to test the slack in the line, you have seen those people start to say, well, I wish they'd just tell us. And in the past, statements have basically summed up to, you don't want us to tell us, because if we do tell you, the answer is going to be no. So it's better for us to operate in this gray area where you're getting to do some of it, because if you push us all the way to the brink that we have to make a decision, it's not going to be the one you'd like. These range from DPS meters, these to people that are botting PvP, to people that are getting call-outs in fights, similar to a Deadly Boss Mods. A DBM is kind of the phrase for it, even though like it's expanded well beyond just the one original kind of add-on that coined the term. And you know, they range a huge spectrum. Some people are using them to augment their RP experience. There is a lot of third-party tools that are used in and around this game, from everything from modifying the UI to modifying your gameplay, etc. And this is before you get into alleged cheating. People who have been accusing certain raid groups of having access to private servers. Before we get on the subject of data mining, this is basically anything that is outside of the dev's intent, as gauged through what they're capable of. So not, oh, well, I think they would do this, but they can't, so I'll just do it for them. No. If they didn't put it in the game, it's not meant to be there. If they didn't release a statement, it's not meant to be told. In that very literal sense, let's dive into this. Yoshi P has asked that none of this gets shared unless you're going to share the whole thing. So I am going to read the whole letter here because Yoshi P asks us to. So I put that kind of summary up front for anybody that wants to jump past this part. Because this is a long letter, and I think it addresses a lot of it very, very clearly, which Yoshi P is known for. He's known for, he's gotten very good at it. He's been communicating with us on serious issues for 10 years. And so let's go ahead and dive in. Hello, this is Naoki Yoshida, producer and director of Final Fantasy XIV. With the release of patch 6.11 and Dragon Song's Reprise Ultimate, we've heard concerns from players about the use of third-party tools and the potential for game server emulation. I've touched on these topics previously in live letters, but I'd like to take this opportunity to formally address them. Live letters are formal in a way, and it is his face, but a lot of times, most of them are live translated, and instead, so these ones here, this is where, these are translated in-house. If it is done in writing, take these just a hair more seriously than the fact that he's already very measured in his words when he addresses us live at least twice per patch. Please note, this will be a lengthy post containing difficult technical terminology and may not be of interest to the average player. Moreover, this announcement is meant to be read in its entirety, so I ask to please refrain from sharing excerpts of this text out of context. So we may quote parts of this in the future, but just keep in mind, it is always meant to reference back to the entire document. No one part of this document is meant to stand on its own. The use of third-party tools. As stated in the terms of service for Final Fantasy XIV, use of third-party tools is strictly prohibited. Players who are determined to be using third-party tools will have their accounts suspended or permanently banned for repeat offenses. This has happened. It has happened recently. It has happened in the past. This is not new. This does happen. Defining third-party tools. We have received requests from players asking that we define what tools aren't permissible, but to do so would require an assessment of all third-party tools available on the internet, as well as all gaming devices and their functionality. Unfortunately, such an undertaking is physically impossible, which is why we decided to simply prohibit the use of all third-party tools and software. That's what I mean when I say players in the past have asked for a clear definition. They're like, you're not going to like it because the definition's going to be no. This is why you can't have your phone on an airplane, because they don't have time to sit down and run every single version of every single piece of hardware that's possible. It's easier to just say, everybody shut your freaking devices off. By the same token, it is impossible for us to check what programs are installed on every player's PC. This is why we cannot identify and reprimand offenders 100% of the time. To offer more clarity on our process, here are the few examples of rule violations we prioritize for investigation. Use of tools that allow a player to more easily complete content. Modification of the UI to display additional information. It's got a little asterisk there. We'll talk about that. Use of packet spoofing tools, or any action or public statement that promotes the use of third-party tools. If, hypothetically, you were to see a streamer put, "I'm going to get a ban" as their stream title, and brag about how they're rebelling against this, and then that player who has received bans in the past gets another ban, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel sorry for you. There are people literally poking the bear right now. Oh my gosh, I'm too busy doing this illicit thing publicly. What? You're tying their hands. What do you want them to do? Do you want to be banned? Is that what's good here? Like, just stop. Like, stop. All reports of such activity warrant investigation, and accounts determined to be in violation of the game's terms of service will be suspended or banned. Unless there is a significant change to the terms of service, which would be publicly announced, this rule remains as is. Hacks, mods, risk of infection from malicious software. Now, hacks are alterations of a program that can allow for otherwise impossible things to happen. For Final Fantasy XIV, which relies on server-client communication, hacking is much more difficult than other online games. Moreover, our security measures are being improved upon constantly, and we will continue to bolster them in the future. Supplementary tools, known as mods, however, can do a number of things, such as display additional information sent by Final Fantasy XIV servers on the screen, or send false packet information to change the location of characters. In the case of the latter, we have systems in place to automatically check and inspect system logs, allowing us to immediately take action against cheaters when discovered. In short, the use of such tools will not allow players to automatically clear high-end content, yet carries a high risk of being penalized, so we ask that you refrain from using them. We received many inquiries regarding infection by viruses and spyware that steal passwords after downloading third-party programs and plugins. To keep your system secure, we ask that you exercise judgment and refrain from needlessly downloading third-party tools or software of unknown origins. In most games, needlessly download sounds distant, out of touch. It sounds like, oh, we think our game runs fine. And so they just kind of launch that out there. In Final Fantasy's case, however, the macro system is as robust or more than most other games. The UI and the cross hotbar system for controller players, the amount of customization for players of all kinds, and the ability to resize, change the opacity, move around, break apart all of the different windows is immensely powerful. Most games, if I were to, for example, stop and compare this to World of Warcraft, I would put World of Warcraft modded at the most customization of the two, then I would put Final Fantasy as the most customization, and then I would put native WoW, even with the changes they've announced for Dragonflight, way below what Final Fantasy can offer in UI customization. So when they say needless, It really is largely true. I have a little bit of a caveat in damage meters because I think that they don't do a great job of communicating what those are meant to entail. But I understand their stance on those, and that's not really what this post is single-handedly targeted at, though it does include those. So, enhancement to the HUD and other UI elements. We believe that people use aforementioned tools to expand the HUD and display more information because they feel existing functions are insufficient for tackling high-end duties. In recognition of this, we intend to review the most prominent tools, and in order to discourage their use, endeavor to enhance functionality of the HUD. Though it will take some time, we're determined to make it happen, not least for the benefit of those who play on consoles, which means they don't have access to add-ons. High-end duties in world races. It goes without saying that we're aware of world races and high-end duties. As developers, we're proud they've grown into one of the we're proud to have grown into one of the few games where they're held, and it delights us to see so many players participate as well as spectate with great interest. But a race should be fair, and it's in our earnest wish that participants don't use third-party tools. Indeed, we've only released duties that we have proven can be beaten with the game's standard features. Without a doubt, 6.11 Dragonsong's Reprise is the hardest duty we've ever created. Some may compare it to Unending Coil of Bahamut, but taking into account our players' improved skill, the increased number of actions, and more complex mechanics, the latest Ultimate entry has the edge. To be able to conquer it in such short time requires great individual prowess, teamwork, and support, and you can consider this gamer thoroughly impressed. Because such races are unofficial, we usually limit our involvement to some comments after a number of teams have cleared the duty by offering our congratulations via the official Twitter account by confirming timestamps. We want to recognize your achievements and contribute to community excitement. However, if our recognition encourages excessive competition and controversy to the extent that players resort to third-party tools, I regret to say that we may have to reconsider making comments in the future. Data mining and screenshot leaks. Due to an oversight on the development team's part, model data for Dragonsong's Reprise was present in patch 6.08 data. The data was mined, the appearance of the raid's final boss was made public, and such data is normally masked and cannot be discovered, but this time slipped through our checks. In addition, at virtually the same time that the patch was released, a screenshot from a phase that players had yet to reach was leaked. We believe it came from an insider and are in the middle of a thorough investigation. We refrained from making this known earlier because it would have made the investigation more difficult if the suspect were aware of it. Such leaks are utterly unacceptable, for they not only undermine the efforts of the development and operation teams, but they also take away from our players' enjoyment. Previously, when a major leak occurred, prior to the release of Shadowbringers, we succeeded in identifying the culprit and took legal action. There has been another leak despite this, is deeply concerning, and in addition to bringing the offender to account, will take measures to prevent a repeat of the situation. Now, be it graphical resources or something else, there may be legal ramifications for mining private data via illicit means with the intent to make it public. Perhaps due to high interest, however, we've been seeing websites that openly release mined graphical data. As a show of our admiration for those who clear ultimate raids, we design their reward weapons to be as eye-catching as possible, and to widely spread their images outside of the game could diminish players' motivation to earn them. I've made this request before, and I make it again. Please refrain from disseminating mined data. Server emulation. The leaks outlined above led to some speculate that groups may have used server emulators to figure out the progression timeline for this battle. However, Final Fantasy XIV is run by a variety of independent programs operating on a multitude of specialized servers, so to completely emulate its server environment outside our infrastructure is impossible. It would cost tens of millions of yen to obtain the necessary servers. Without these servers and their proprietary programming, while one could potentially pull the client software and display model data and the like, the game itself will not operate. Even if one were to somehow accomplish such a feat, it would still be physically impossible to run the unique programming introduced to the servers upon application of each patch before the patch is even released. The progression timeline for each duty exists solely within this server-side code and is never introduced in the patch data downloaded to players' clients. I apologize for any undue concern caused by these rumors, which themselves were sparked by the aforementioned leaks, and once again assure you that we will conduct a full investigation to prevent this from happening in the future. In conclusion, thanks to our devoted Warriors of Light, Final Fantasy XIV has grown into a titan among games. This means that it is now home to players from all walks of life, and not just longtime Final Fantasy XIV fans, but ones who have recently come to join us from a myriad of other game communities as well. Many more eyes are now on Final Fantasy XIV, and posting about it garners a great deal of attention, which has changed how information is shared online and spreads throughout the player base. With this in mind, I would like to encourage the development of a strong Final Fantasy XIV community by continuing to provide commentary as I have today. Truly, I cannot apologize enough for the many mistakes we made in 6.1 and the resulting disappointment in such a major patch. Nevertheless, we intend to forge ahead so that Final Fantasy XIV may continue to bring joy to as many players as possible, and we hope you will stay with us on this journey. Naoki Yoshida, Final Fantasy XIV's producer and director. So, with that out of the way, let's go back. Use of third-party tools can be banned. This is not new. It has been this way. This is not a change. Third-party tools includes a wide variety. Anything you download outside the Final Fantasy XIV client, when in doubt, assume that it is included in this. The exception, I believe, to be shaders, but just if you are ever in doubt of if something has gotten too powerful, if you download something that's starting to offer you unique features that the game does not offer otherwise, you should assume it likely breaks this. And definitely don't then take that to go out and promote and share that tool. Because, alright, the people who are like bragging that they use third-party tools in stream names right now, I assume that they think that the ban will benefit their stream size or something. Like, I just can't see any benefit to going out and bragging. If they're trying to say, we only want to enforce this in the most extreme cases, you are taking what otherwise they may consider a minor case of you using it. They're like, you know what? I get that they're using it, it's against the rules, but I don't want to sit here and enforce it. And instead of you being 1 mile an hour over the speed limit and saying, well, the cop chose not to pull me over because it's only 1 mile an hour over, you are waving a flag out the side of your car saying, cops are dicks and they should come enforce this. Bet they can't. Okay, well, if the 1 mile an hour wasn't enough to get their attention, you're sure trying. If you get a virus or spyware from a third-party tool, they don't feel sorry for you. Now, this is the first section where I start to have an issue. When they say, we are going to review the most prominent tools and in order to discourage their use, endeavor to enhance functionality, this sends a mixed message. This says that if you run into an issue in the game and solve it as an add-on maker, they might implement it in-game. I can assure you that it is not a lack of understanding that is stopping them from putting DPS meters in the game. It is a whole wide variety of what they feel it will do to the culture of the game, and so it is not a capability issue. It is not, they like that add-ons like DPS meters have to exist outside of the game. They are perfectly capable of putting a DPS meter in game. Do not assume that this means they are looking at DPS meters and are going to put one in game. That being said, the fact that certain add-ons exist and they say they're going to review those and possibly put them in game says whether or not they did that privately, to come out and publicly say that, I think does risk sending the message, while you risk illicit behavior, your illicit behavior may cause meaningful change. And this moves us beyond a right to kind of peacefully protest and says, if you riot, we might actually make changes that we would not make otherwise. The things in these tools are the things we're going to be looking at to implement. I think that's a risk. I think instead something that is more vague, while we are aware of certain complaints and we always strive to improve our HUD, We want to make sure that this is something that is done in a fashion that is accessible to all players, not the least of which are people on console, who wouldn't have the ability to circumvent this if they tried. So, like, I think to call out and say within enhancements to HUD that we're not just looking at how players play and what players complain about and what's working in other games and what people are calling for in Q&As, etc. We are looking at people who are breaching terms of service as inspiration, I think does send a mixed message in the context of this. It is not we are striving to get rid of third-party tools. This is we are continuing to enforce bans and are warning you they will be banned. Except that, like, some of the stuff you're doing is pretty freaking cool. World First Races, this has been a long, big accusal, so to come out and say that the groups that people say are using private tools, and that's why those groups, for example, might not stream their progression, which is already a huge advantage, especially on long single boss fights like Ultimates, where, you know, they can progress in a phase for a long time, and that benefits everybody else, because once you see that phase, now you still have to clear it. Every time you wipe, you have to start the boss over. So I can understand why groups do it privately. Big congratulations to the first Twitch team to get the clear, as well as the first private. I think that was really great. I think it was Team Kryl was the first stream team to get the clear, and I think both of those are worth recognizing, because it is a very different feat to clear something where people can see what you're doing or have already seen a clear video than it is to clear something where you may have access to data that you've discovered and learned and nobody else has access to data. They are both worthy and, in my mind, considered a world first, but as from the excitement as a viewer, I really do appreciate the stream ones, because I get to watch them. And so I do want to say thank you to all the teams that streamed their progress, because as somebody that doesn't do Ultimates, that's a really great way for me to enjoy that from afar. So speaking on behalf of the huge number of players that don't do Ultimates, thank you for sharing your progress. But those private teams are not using private servers, not to mention that if they were using data mining, it would be impossible for them to have data mined something before it was data mineable. So if there are things that are not implemented until a patch release or are not implemented on client side at all, you know, while the graphics may be uploaded, the timelines may not, it's literally impossible for somebody to be like, oh, well, I bet they've been practicing Dragon Song's Reprise since Endwalker dropped. Like, as an exaggeration of what people say, they assume that these people are already fighting the boss before the boss is even released. So what happens with these rumors is they start with something like, I bet they have access to some private data. I bet they have some private data mining that's giving them access to, it started with, I believe, tooltips. I bet they're data mining tooltips and they're getting access to changes in classes or boss abilities before anybody else. And so they're able to gauge what the game is trying to design by reading the tooltips on a debuff or something like that. And that grew into, I bet they can see the boss phases before they come out. And that evolved into, I bet they can see the boss timeline. I bet they can load their characters to a private server and practice. And then they just have to go over to the real server once they can execute perfectly, which I've seen good groups not execute Ultimates perfectly. And then they're just getting the clear. And that's how they're getting done before everybody else. I bet that's why they won't stream. It couldn't at all be any of the reasons they've claimed, such as doing it publicly may change the structure of the group, which it will. It absolutely will. If the public thinks that a certain member of the group comes across as a dick, they're going to say that, and it may spark a divide. Airing your dirty laundry is not great. It's a huge competitive advantage to share the way you communicate, the way you plan, the way you read mechanics, what things you research in advance, all those conversations. That is why some stream teams do stream, but then don't stream party comms, so you only see the members who choose to stream, because they maintain kind of a compromise where they get some of those advantages, but you still get to see gameplay progression. So it's a lot more complex than this, but effectively, they're not running emulated servers. They're just not. Now, as far as mined data, Yoshi has expressed that they do watch players' reactions to content for the first time, be it story, be it world first races, whatever. So by data mining something, we do two things. First of all, we remove that element of surprise. All of a sudden, they've worked months to release something, and we stand around and say, yeah, I knew that was coming, though. Like, I already knew it. So, whatever. And so it takes something away from them. something that we give back that they actively enjoy. Second of all, it often leads to misunderstandings because we never get access to the full picture. We get access to a skin, we get access to a new mount, which is one of the more recent controversies around data mining, where a mount releases and people then begin assuming, I know where that mount comes from, I know how we'll get it, it's absolutely awesome that it works in this way that I assume based solely off of an image and nothing else. And then when that mount releases and it turns out that in this example it is a Mog Station purchase, all of a sudden we're mad because the devs didn't get a chance to, in all of their wisdom, release the information in the way it would have made sense to in the first place, which is we're excited to announce new Mog Station items so that people who don't like that sort of thing can immediately roll their eyes and ignore it. Instead, we've let everybody get excited about something, and now they feel like they've been slighted something that never existed. You've begun speculating, oh my god, my friend has a new stereo in box at his house, or a new TV or whatever. I bet he's giving it to me for my birthday. Dude, did you hear he's giving me a new TV for my birthday? Oh my god, I can't believe he's giving me a new TV for my birthday. And then it turns out it's not for you, and all of a sudden you're mad at them for something that was never going to happen. So, like, data mining is immensely problematic in this context, especially in a game that does so much upfront communication. When you talk about data mining almost as a form of valid communication in some other games, where there are whole websites where the data mining is front and center from day one, from companies that historically have gone through phases where they have refused to do interviews, they have refused to do community interactions, they have said that when the community responds negatively, their response is going to be to communicate less, then data mining becomes the only source of knowing what is coming into a game that defines many of our lives as far as our free time goes. So data mining, you're not leaving people other options, but they give us a minimum of 2 live letters per patch, which are multiple hours long. They post to the lodestone at least once per every main positive or negative announcement. In many cases, like housing, it is a saga of posts over, here's what went wrong, here's what we're looking at doing, here comes the fix is announced. It is a whole series of posts. And so, to take a company where the director and producer, if not the rest of the team, communicate with us between interviews, in-house public announcements, written announcements to their websites, and blog posts, it is not unfathomable to believe that we hear directly from somebody that is working on Final Fantasy XIV, somebody near the top of Final Fantasy XIV, if not the top of Final Fantasy XIV, at least 100 times a year. Now, it's not once every 3 days. It's big waves. Here comes this announcement. We get 30 interviews over 2 weeks, or all on an embargo date or whatever. But we hear a lot from this team. So to then go data mine and release information when they want phase transitions to be surprising in an ultimate fight, when they want the chance to add new mounts to the game, and the data gets added early, we're doing them a huge disservice, and a disservice that is largely avoidable. It is not nearly as justifiable as it is in games that have refused to communicate, and so players are hungry for just any piece of information and will absolutely go to trying to data mine to get it. So I think this is a very reasonable request. And so, like, in conclusion, that's what this is. People aren't running emulation. Stop stealing our stuff, and stop running third-party tools, which they have asked for in the past. Now, with DPS meters, I think they have done a poor job giving players room for individual improvement, especially since in PvP you can see people's damage. Those of you who have never enjoyed PvP and are now with Crystalline Conflict seeing it, notice you can see every single player's damage, match over match. You can see their healing, so you know when a player's not pulling their weight. That doesn't mask their name. It doesn't mask anything. You can see them. So to say it avoids harassment or toxicity, they're allowing it in one game mode. So why they're not giving us access to that data at the end of a dungeon, at the end of a raid, so that you can see the damage you did on a clear, at least at an individual level, I disagrey with, fundamentally. I think that when I am looking to actively improve on a class, I would like more than Stone Sky Sea Air telling me that I either killed the totem or didn't, to tell me where I'm doing things wrong. I would love that tool to go even further to help me gauge things like, Other players on your class with a similar item level have cleared this content and on average done this amount of DPS. This percentage of their DPS has come from, I don't know, Tomahawk, right? And we have noticed that you're not using Tomahawk at all. You're not using Tomahawk at all. Okay, that's something I can work on. Oh my gosh, I just came back to the game. I didn't realize Tomahawk no longer breaks combos. Awesome. Now improve on that. So the fact that they have introduced these numbers into the end of PvP and yet have continued to restrict conversations in PvP, they've restricted communications, they would still enforce bans if you were to go contact that player and tell them they were garbage, says they do know how to navigate this. They do know how to release the information and then enforce it on the back end and on the front end to say, we're not going to give you data in real time because we don't want players stopping and leaving the group or whatever when they see DPS. Get your clear, then we'll give you the data. And if you harass on the back end, that's the same as harassment any other time. It's just like walking up to somebody in Limsa and saying mean or gross things to them. You can get a ban for that. It's exactly the same. It's reportable in the same way. So, like, I think that they are perfectly capable of enforcing don't be toxic. They have made posts on it in the past. I don't know why they're not giving us DPS meters, and it feels unbelievably baity that they're basically saying there's no reason for third-party tools in the context of DPS meters, because there is nothing in this game that mimics the information you can get from seeing a parse. There's nothing that emulates, and people are like, well, you can practice on a dummy till your rotation's perfect. That does not tell you what mistakes you make when you're flustered, when your focus is not on your rotation. When your focus is on boss mechanics or team callouts, what is the muscle memory rotation, which may be worse in some way. So I would just say, like, DPS meters as the final piece of this is the one thing that they really haven't done a great job of totally replacing. I don't think you need third-party tools to modify the UI to any reason I know of. Yes, there are some things like weak auras that I wish were a little more implemented in this game. Not fully, but a little more capable. And I've talked about those in the past, especially on stream when I'm running into those frustrations. But I think in general, the game is perfectly playable as it sits. If they would address DPS meters in some degree, some ability to, if you are in a full pre-made party, we will give you your DPS numbers at the end of the clear, or something like that. Something where I can see what I'm doing, to actively see, okay, here's what I'm doing, here's what other people are doing, they're doing more than me. How do I improve? How do I improve? And so I think that's a big part of that. They would then have to enforce, though, that you can't have party finder things that say you need to post your previous clears, and if you don't have your previous clears, we don't want this to turn into similar things that have popped up in, like, the Mythic Plus community in WoW, where now it acts as a form of proof. And if you don't have that proof, you're not allowed in. People are already doing that with gear score and things like that, so it's not that the behavior doesn't exist, but we don't need to augment it and accelerate it. So it's a hard thing to handle. I understand why they've taken the stance they have. I just disagree with it. The rest of this post, I think, is 100% reasonable and is something they should absolutely have a positive response on. And I'm a little frustrated that I've already seen stream titles of, you can't do anything to me. Bet I'm gonna get a ban. Awesome. Awesome. Like, if you weren't doing something wrong before, you are now. Like, stop. Stop. Like, they're acting like this is some parent saying that they can't go to the mall. And it's not. Like, what they're asking for here is not insane. It's just not. They're just asking for a little bit of respect for the game that they play that I think we all enjoy the vast majority of the time. I don't know. It'd just be nice if we could all be a little more reasonable about the game we play and the community that forms around it. Kinda.